Great. Okay. Brett, are we live? Great. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday night meditation class at the London Buddhist Centre, and welcome to you, to those of you that are joining us on YouTube as well. Lovely to have you with us. So do say where you're tuning in from in the chat. Brett's looking after the tech tonight, so say hello to Brett and everyone else, and introduce yourselves online. So yeah, really lovely to have you all with us. My name is Padmanandi. So I just want to make a special welcome to two people that have just come off a 3-month ordination retreat. Now, those of us that are wearing these white pieces of material, these are called cases. We're members of the Triratna Buddhist order, and Maitri Shura and Maitri Kumara. Where are you, Maitri Kumara? Hello at the back there. A very special welcome to you. Welcome to the order and welcome back. I hope you both land really well. So lovely to have you with us both tonight. Yeah, have you with us tonight. I'm so hot, my glasses are steaming up. Yeah, so, well, yes, as Savannah Jyoti said, we are the second week into a very special series exploring the nature of mind. So I don't know whether any of you have been tuning into the seminars and the meditations. Maybe just put your hand up if you have been. Yeah, lovely. So yeah, you'll be aware that basically there's been this exploration over the last 6 months of an interface between Buddhism and people in different disciplines and fields, also exploring mind and consciousness. So pulling on sort of academics, psychiatrists, and yeah, there's this conversation that's been going on exploring what mind is, what consciousness is. So last week, Maitreyabandhu kicked us off. Hello, come in, welcome. Is there any spare space? Put your hand up if there's a spare space, and if not, maybe one of the team can get you some cushions and get you comfortable. Okay, yeah, so last week Maitreyabandhu kicked us off with this question of does brain make consciousness? And really looking at the work of academic, a scholar, a psychiatrist who's been working with the mind for many, many years, Dr. Ian McGilchrist. And this week, in the second half, Maitreyabandhu will be exploring, it's what is rebirth this week, isn't it, Maitreyabandhu? What is rebirth? Yeah, so in the second half, we'll have another exploration. So the emphasis really is on exploration. Yeah? And I'll say a little bit more about what we were talking about last week, does brain make consciousness? But I'll lead us in an arriving practice first, and so let's get set up. So try and get as comfortable as possible, and if you're at home as well, get as comfortable as you can. I know it's really hot in here in the shrine room. We do have a fan on, so just bring that into your meditation. Yeah, so taking your time to set up well. So is there anything you can do right now to make yourself just a little bit more comfortable? So you can start by taking a couple of deep breaths into and out of the body. Just allow yourself to land on the cushion or chair just a little bit more fully. Noticing the breath coming in and out of your body. So the chest or belly rising on the inhale, and feeling that connection of your buttocks against the cushion or chair. You might be able to feel the bone of your sitting bones beneath you. Just notice if you're bracing in the upper half of your body. You can just sit back onto your support, just letting go, starting to let go of your weight into your support of the chair or the cushion. And see if you can allow or tune into a sense of the weight of your body dropping down through your legs into the floor, into the earth beneath you. Noticing any holding in the lower part of your body, particularly around the belly. Any gripping in the legs. And on each exhale, see if you can just release a little bit more through the lower body. The earth is there to support us. It can take your weight. And bringing your attention, your awareness into the torso, the belly, chest, shoulders, and the back of the body, the back of the ribs. And allowing the spine to be long and upright. The arms gently flowing out of their sockets, coming to rest in the hands. Allowing your attention to rest in your hands. The sensations of your hands. Those tiny bones, tendons, and nerves. All that life, all that sensation in your hands. And bringing your attention to your neck and your head. Again, tuning in with the sensations, maybe the feeling of hair or air on your skin. Your eyes sitting in their sockets. And your nose. You might be able to feel the sensation of breathing around the nostrils, the coolness of the air as the breath comes in through the nostrils. And your mouth, allowing the lips to be soft. Your tongue can rest in its mouth, in your mouth. So having an overall sense of your weight dropping through the body into the floor, your upper body being upright and alert. Noticing the quality of mental activity, what's happening? Is your mind busy after the day's activities? So tuning into your experience. What's happening for you? And any emotions that are present. How are you feeling? And allowing your attention to rest on your breath in your body, your breathing body. So finding a place in your body where you can notice the air coming in, maybe a sense of expansion around the belly or the shoulders. And just allowing your attention to rest lightly on the breath coming and going. So we don't have to control the breath or breathing. We can just notice our body breathing itself. Just lightly rest our attention there. If you find yourself distracted or pulled off by a story or emotion, just come back to the breath in your body. Hi, welcome. Hi. Okay. Yeah, I'm sweltering too. I'm just wondering, could we open those doors, just see if we could allow a little bit more air in? Thanks, Niall. Thank you. Yeah, so as I was saying last week, Maitreyabandhu kicked off this series, this 4-week series of questions, with the question, does brain create consciousness? So exploring the work of Dr. Ian McGilchrist and this interface with Buddhism. And one of the things that Maitreyabandhu mentioned was that Ian McGilchrist has various theories around mind and consciousness, but he thinks, and we don't know for sure, that brain allows consciousness to flow. Brain allows consciousness to flow. What does that mean? So, and I was really struck. I was left with the question last week of, well, yeah, how does consciousness flow? What does that mean to me? And I'll come back to that. But something that really has caught my attention over the last couple of weeks is the James Webb Telescope, the NASA project. Yeah, people are aware of that. And so there's been this 20-year project led by, it's been a collaboration through different space agencies, but led by NASA. And the James Webb Telescope basically replaces Hubble, which some of you might have know about. And so basically this telescope, there's been this team working on developing this telescope over the last 15 years. And it's quite a feat of engineering. It really is quite a feat of engineering. I was watching a documentary about it this week. And it's cost many billions of pounds. And it was launched on Christmas Day from, I think, Uruguay, somewhere in South America. And it took a month. It's basically orbiting the sun, but it's in a point called Lagrange point, and it's nearly 1 million miles away from the Earth. It just really struck me. That's a phenomenal distance. When you think that the furthest we could probably travel on Earth is Australia, which is 10,000 miles. So this telescope is located, 930,000 miles away. Yeah. And so over the last 6 months, it's been taking images. And NASA's just released these images. And one of them is called SMAX 023. I have no idea what that stands for. I really don't. And I've been looking it up this week. Basically, it's a really clear image of, they think the deepest image we have of space at the moment. And quite a few years ago, Hubble took the same image. It was set on a long exposure over 12 hours, took the same image, but basically technology has obviously significantly changed, and there's this SMAX 0723 image, and it's incredibly beautiful. I found it incredibly beautiful. It's basically very distant galaxies, and there's a number of different images that have come out of that. The Carina Nebula. Do people know? Are you with me? Have you seen these images? Yeah. So there's the Carina Nebula, which is like a series of cliffs, but basically they think it's sort of like a nursery for stars. So it's full of gas and rock. And there's another one called the Stephan's Quintet, which is a series of 5 galaxies. So do check out these images because they are incredibly beautiful. They're really, really beautiful. This smacks 0723. I mean, it's, the name in a way is just, it doesn't really sum up the beauty of it. In a way, to me, it feels like, it looks like a field of gems. A field of gems. Yeah, it's incredibly beautiful. But as I was looking at these images, I became aware that, this light, it takes many billions of years. These galaxies are so far away, these stars are so far away, that it takes billions of years for the light to reach us. Billions of years for the light to reach us. And in a way, I can't get my head around that, and I can't explain it. It feels unfathomable, but I know it really moves me. These images really move me. So that's an incredible amount of time, isn't it, for that light to reach us, billions and billions of years. When you consider how long we live for. We might live for 70, 80, maybe 90 years. Yeah. So I was really, really struck by that. And it, having been left with the question about consciousness flowing through the brain, well, what do I do with my consciousness? What do I do with my mind? And I get really caught up in the minutiae, and often I'm with, if only. So one of my if onlys at the moment is, if only I didn't have blisters on my feet, I'd be much more content. Or if only I had another pair of Birkenstocks, or and I can spend a lot of time into that, putting energy into that if only things were different, if only I had that, or if things weren't that way. Yeah. And I record an experience I had. Experience is a bit of a trite word, to be honest, but my maternal grandmother, Alice, she died aged 93, so she had, quite a long life. And but she was 6 months before she died, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer and dementia. And my mum cared for her. We moved her into my mum's house, and I used to go down to Sussex, where they were living, and help my mum at the weekends. So, and we had a couple of times when I was there looking after my nan, where we thought, this is it. We had one night where Nan just was so restless. We called the doctor out and we thought, oh God, is she going to die tonight? It wasn't that night. And she ended up going into a hospice, primarily to give my mum some respite. And we had a call from the hospice to say, to my mum, your mum's taken quite a bad turn, and you need to come in and see her. You need to come in now. So we drove over to the hospice, and it was quite clear when we entered the room that she was very close to the end of her life. Very, very close. And her breathing had changed. So my mum and I were with her, and I remember holding her hand. And it was very, very tender and moving time. And so my nan passed away, and somehow in the day that followed, the minutiae of what I get caught up in kind of dropped away. And the petty irritations that I hold with my mum dropped away. And it was as if things were more beautiful, or I felt incredibly tender. I'd lost my nan. My nan had died. But I also felt, well, a really deep sense of appreciation, particularly for my mum, like I was saying. And that experience then changed. And I got back into, oh, if only things were different. Yeah. So what I'd like us to do tonight, I'll ring bells for a Metta but what I'd like us to bring into the Metta is a sense of appreciation for what we have. And so maybe in the first stage you could just think, you could just be something quite simple, appreciating the fact that you brought yourself here this evening. And with your friend, just what you have in that friendship. And maybe in the third stage, someone you don't know, obviously, but could be your post person. They deliver your post. So it's this sort of, we've got this web of interconnection and trying to tune in with that. But what I'd also say is that what is present, acknowledge that. So with the Metta Bhavana, what we can do is we might not be, it's not necessarily a feeling of metta, but having an attitude or an intention that we can open up to something other and allow something other, regardless of what's going on in our experience. So we acknowledge that. And is there more? Is there more that we can open up to? And in this case, can we open up to a sense of appreciation for what we have? Okay? So I'll ring bells, like I said, for 5 stages of the Metta Bhavana. So let's get set up again. Okay, so again, feeling your contact with the cushion or chair beneath you. A sense of your weight dropping into the floor. Relaxing through the legs. And the upper body. Upright. And alert. The Metta Bhavana. So notice what's happening. So if you're feeling restless, see if you can notice the urge to move before you move, and keep connected with your posture and your breath. So just allow any sounds to come into consciousness. And leave too. No need to hook into any sound. Allow the sound to come and go. Very gently you can start letting go, start relaxing any effort you've been making, and just sitting with your experience, sitting with metta and appreciation. Sitting with experience rising and passing away. Okay, well done everyone. It's I know it's really hot in the shrine room. So so in the second half, Maitreyabandhu will be exploring what is the question of what is rebirth. But let's go and have a cup of tea. So and we will be joined in the second half by people in the newcomers, so we might just need to shuffle around a little bit and to accommodate the people that will be joining us. So let's go and have a cup of tea. So thanks everyone. And
so there are places over here. There's always places in front of the teacher. Seems to be tradition. Back row gets taken very quickly. There are places down here. We can leave the doors open, that's not it. Okay, so let's just start this second half by doing a short meditation. So I don't want it to be too much talking. just to sort of settle and prepare for the second half. So setting up your meditation posture. A lot of people have been saying how hot it is, and that's just how it is. So if you kind of react to that, if you resist that, you'll just make it worse. So just think you're somewhere lovely that's hot, rather than miserable grief, and just relax into it. Yeah. So when you're ready, closing your eyes. As soon as you've closed your eyes, you're trying to open up your experience to include your whole body. So last week we were exploring the nature of mind. One thing we said is that perhaps the mind isn't a thing that's located in your brain. Perhaps it would be better to think of the mind as somehow animating the whole body. So opening up your mind is opening up your mind to the body sensations. It's simplest to start with those very direct sensations like your backside on the chair or the cushions. This direct sense of contact. You don't need to think about that contact. You just need to feel it. You can feel your feet on the floor. You don't need to think about your feet or picture your feet. See if you can actually feel whatever you feel, which is a kind of energy, isn't it? It's not really a thing or an image or an idea. And opening up to more and more sensations in your body. And some of those sensations of your body are pleasant or relatively pleasant. Some of them are unpleasant or uncomfortable. Some of them are a bit kind of nothing. And you're just trying to open up to all of that. You're trying to welcome all of that. You're trying not to pick and choose. And then see if you can steady your mind a bit by tuning into your breath. And your breath is massaging the body from the inside. And all you need to do is feel that. tune into that. And then see if you can open up your awareness to include more and more of your body sensations. And you're trying to have this welcoming attitude to your experience. Even if your experience is uncomfortable, you're just trying to welcome that in. Relax into it. Tuning into any sounds around you, opening up to that as well. Sounds in the room, sounds of any traffic outside. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes. Good, so just sit comfortably, don't carry on sitting in your meditation posture. Should have told you my name. My name is Maitreyabandhu. Nice to see you. So what we're going to be exploring this evening is what is rebirth. Yeah? So this is one of four big questions that we're asking ourselves, I suppose, and asking you. Last week was, does brain create consciousness? So if you haven't watched last week, if you weren't here last week, you can catch up on it on YouTube. You can catch up on me on YouTube. This week, what is rebirth. Next week we're going to explore what happens when you die. Well, they're all quite straightforward questions. And then the final week we're going to try and magically wrap it all together with what is the nature of mind. So last week, as I say, we explored does brain create consciousness? And as Padmanandi said, particularly referring to the conversations that we've had with Dr. Ian McGilchrist. In fact, we've filmed 2 new conversations with him that we're going to be premiering on this retreat that I'm leading with others at the end of August. So do join us. If you don't go with Emily Odin, come with us. Do join us on that Nature of Mind retreat where we're going to explore these big questions more deeply. And I want to come back to McGilchrist's thought, perhaps, I never know when, but certainly on the last evening of our seminar on what is the nature of mind. And then, so tonight we're looking at what is rebirth. Next week we'll look at what happens when you die, and then we'll explore what is the nature of mind. So I thought I'll start tonight with a short personal story just from today, and then sort of wind my way into this question about rebirth. And it's interesting because when I looked at the title again, this probably isn't such a big question for many people. What happens when you die really captures this question as well, but we had to create 4 questions for 4 weeks. But anyway, marketing, darling. So you probably haven't got a burning question of what is rebirth, but anyway, let's see whether we can explore it. So today I was in hospital again. My partner, for want of a better word, has had this sort of health crisis, something called a health crisis, and we went up to see the consultant. And it's very. I used to be a nurse, so I know hospitals relatively well. And as soon as you step into a hospital, you step into a whole world. You can almost forget, once you're in that world, it is like a complete world. The trolley comes round, and the drugs go round, and you can start to sort of forget another world. And it's a world where you really see how vulnerable we are, crikey. There's a slight comic moment this morning as well, because someone said, Susan Smith. And 2 people said yes. There was actually 2 Susan Smiths in the room. And this woman said, I've never had that before. But it was like a name for every woman, Susan, Smith. Anyway, there we go. But you really, when you go to even just to visit a hospital again, just to go see a consultant, you really see how fragile we are. You suddenly are in a world where this human being is a fragile, perilous matter, and you feel it, don't you? I don't know if you sort of feel it. That somebody was wheeled in a bed, and he is so fragile. And then I saw somebody go in, and he was really fragile, and then you see the nurses, how much work there is, and the poor beleaguered NHS where you sort of feel it being drained of funds almost every day you go. But I'm always struck by just how fragile we are, especially when you're going with someone, like your own partner who's in a lot of pain, and just how fragile we are. And as soon as I enter into that space, I sort of think, of course, what was I thinking about? I'd forgotten again how fragile this being human is. And there are all these clinics, and they're just full of people, all in some kind of fragile place. And for me, what that makes me do, and I hope it makes you do, is start to ask those questions again. The questions that, if we're not careful, we too easily put aside to get our emails done or get our latte, our mocha latte, with oat milk done exactly as we like, our jungle smoothie. So we all do it. We put the great questions away every day. All you need to do is go to a hospital, and they confront you, and they're as vivid and as sharp and as, in a way, frankly, grim as they ever have been. They confront you with the fragility of your life. Yeah. So for me, that's where the big questions come from. We're calling these 4 big questions, something like that. And that's where these big questions come from. For me, they're not coming from a philosophical place. I am a bit interested in philosophy, but I was saying last week, I read it at times with great delight and then forget it completely. But say, yeah, it was great, and have nothing to say about it intelligently. Luckily, we've been talking in this last 6 months on the Nature of Mind project. We've been talking to philosophers and psychologists and psychiatrists and thinkers about the nature of mind. So that was my first reflection. Just remember that these questions come from our human fragility, which we forget. Yeah, we constantly forget. We forget our life can turn on a sixpence. We really, really do. I do, and you do. And let's try and remember before we have to remember. That in a way, that's what the Buddhist Center is here for. Is let's remember before we're forced to remember. Yeah, because we won't be equipped if we're just forced to remember. We need to remember now and start to act appropriately. Yeah. But the other thing that really struck me, we went to see this consultant. He was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. He was like a kind of engineer, but an engineer of bodies. And it really struck me about actually what compassion is. It's mainly something you do. It's not something you feel. He was just like, he had this integral knowledge. You can see that he'd been a consultant. He'd been meeting all of these people for many, many years. And he had this, we've already seen two doctors, including a joint specialist. And suddenly here we was with someone who knew things, but in an integral way. He'd learnt a lot. He'd seen a lot. Also, he presumably got things wrong a lot, because how do you learn without getting things wrong? He'd stuck it through, he'd made mistakes, I'm sure. I didn't ask him that. And I was hoping that this wasn't going to be... but, he was immediately listening and saying, okay, well, it might be that, but it could be this, because But he was like this engineer, except for instead of an engineer of machines, an engineer of the body. And in those states of extremis, that's what you want. You don't particularly need a bedside manner. You don't particularly need, in fact, you don't need touchy-feeliness. What you need is someone who will look at you, think about it, and has got lots of experience. And it's like gold dust. He didn't Google anything. He didn't think, pain, let's just... okay, where is it? What do you think it is? Which is what every doctor always says to you. I think they're told to. Well, I don't know. I've come to see a doctor. But yeah, I was really struck. And I suppose I was thinking about this evening, and what that made me reflect on is the value of knowledge itself. And from that, the value of reason, and science. When you've got pain, and when you meet someone who says, yes, you need an urgent MRI, let's do that now, yes, let's do it from that, and let's get you here again in 2 weeks. The MRI, when I was a nurse, there was no such thing, or I can't remember them. They're a miracle of science, and have helped a lot of incredible amount of suffering. So one of the things it reminded me of, and we need to keep on remembering this, is the value of reason and science. It's got its limitations, but you're not bothered about those limitations when you've got lots of pain and somebody knows how to respond to it and find out what it's caused by. A philosophical question about the value of science suddenly weirdly goes out of the window. So I was really struck again by the value of reason and the value of science. And it took me back again to something Ian McGilchrist said, that he said, and I think it's a really important comment, he said there are 4 paths to truth, and that is science, reason, imagination, and intuition. I was just on a retreat at the weekend, and I said I'd like to add the body to that, but because I think you should never get too far away from the body. I mean an embodied sense, but he probably would include that in imagination and intuition, because they're embodied things. And McGilchrist is saying that those 4 things should never be separated, that you shouldn't let science go away on its own without imagination and intuition, and the arts shouldn't allow imagination and intuition to go too far away from sciences. But yeah, so I was really struck again by the preeminent value of science and of reason. yeah, and we must keep on valuing that, yeah. But what we're exploring in these great questions, science may never be able to answer. In fact, Wittgenstein, who's terribly clever, he said, German-English philosopher, he said that when all the possible scientific and philosophical questions have been answered, the essential problems of life remain essentially untouched. Yeah? That the deep issues, the deep questions, what is life for? What is consciousness? How am I alive? Does life have intrinsic meaning and purpose? All the deep questions remain essentially untouched. Yeah. One of the things we're doing in the Nature of Mind is meeting more and more philosophers who are highly critical of materialism. We've already interviewed Bernardo Kastrup, and we're going to interview Philip Goff, who's a panpsychist, which is sort of having a bit of a comeback, panpsychism. Yes, but so on one hand, I want to say reason and science is absolutely crucial where it applies, yeah? And it applies in the spiritual life, for instance, whatever that is. It applies in all human life. It's very, very important. We mustn't get into this sort of silly dismissing of science and especially reason, because that's very, very dangerous. What you definitely don't want people who can't reason. I can tell you that's a very dangerous place to get to. But there are certain things in life in which science will never be able to answer, and reason seems to stop short. And the great matter of that, of course, is death itself. Yeah, all science can tell you is that the physical signs of the pulse and so on are no longer there. They're no longer breathing, so they're dead. We use that word dead as if we know what that means. We actually don't know what that means. I don't know what it means, and you don't know what it means. What we've got when we approach the issue of death is, as I've been saying recently, is a belief disguised as a fact. We're actually pretty much like Victorian Christians, who would have taken God as a fact, not as a belief. People actually thought you were mentally ill if you didn't believe in God. That is just obviously how things are, and the natural world was proof of that, and there was all this proof. It wasn't thought to be a belief. That's much later. Yeah, our idea that after death there's nothing, there's just oblivion, and before birth there's nothing, there's just oblivion. That what we are is possibly to do with neural complexity. The more complex neurons you have, the more likely you to have consciousness to emerge, and we'll come back to this the last week. And Bernardo Kastrup was using, as I said last week, the example of LSD, which actually closes down your brain, and yet you get more experience. I'm not recommending it, of course, because this is a family show. Please take children out of the room if you're watching it. But it actually closes down the brain, and you get more experience, not less. Anyway, that wasn't him suggesting it. It's just saying that starts to question those things. Yeah? Or you think of consciousness somehow some sort of weird freak chemical reaction out of a chaotic and basically meaningless universe. And none of us are. I hope none of us philosophers, because if you are, as I said last week, leave the room now. Most of us have just sort of taken in these views without really noticing it. We've just assumed that, when you die, we kind of know what happens when you die, which is nothing happens when you die, and that's the end, and there's no possible communication beyond death. Nothing goes beyond death. The body doesn't, but nothing else does. We haven't thought that out. You see what I mean? I haven't sat for, I think that is the most likely thing. We've just kind of imbibed it from the culture that we're in. Yeah. So contrast that with this interview that Vajratara did with Carol Bowman. I particularly wanted us to be in conversation with people who've studied children who have past life memories. Yeah. Actually, the person I particularly want to be in conversation with, and I'm hoping we can do this eventually, is the American writer and psychologist, I think, Jim Tucker, who's done a lot of writing about children with past life memories. There's actually been quite a lot of research in the US, particularly about children who have past life memories. I'm agnostic about it. I've never had, well, I think I've had one actually past life memory, but let's draw a curve across that. It wasn't particularly striking, but anyway, I can't think of any other category for it. But so we said to her, what got you interested in children in past life memories? And she said, well, it was my son, my 5-year-old son. So she said, he was 5. I just was seeing such a disaster son just in the street, and he's 5. You know what 5 is like? It's about that high. Big hair. Full of life, a little 5-year-old. And she'd taken him to a 4th of July, it's America, so she'd taken him to a 4th of July firework display, and he got completely hysterical at all the sounds. He just got terribly, terribly frightened, and really beside himself and hysterical. And she didn't make much of it. She, like any parent, you think he's probably had too much sugar. When you have children, you can really see what sugar does to the human organism. They go nuts. She overtired, had too much sugar. And then a few weeks later, she took him swimming in this indoor swimming pool, and people were jumping off the board. It made a very loud booming noise in this indoor swimming pool. And again, this little boy had a kind of hysterical, frightened fit, with this sound. And she was really perplexed, because she said he was a very sort of courageous little boy, very happy, kind of confident little boy. And it never happened before that first time with the firework display. And she said it all happened by happenstance. She was at a party and she had her son on her lap. And she was talking to somebody at this party, and this guy said, "Oh, I'm a hypnotherapist." And he said, "Oh, yes." And she then got into telling him what had happened with the little boy. He said, "Oh, he was getting..." And the hypnotherapist, it's a remarkable little story, the hypnotherapist just said to the little boy, he said, "Well, just close your eyes. When you remember those loud noises, what do you see?" So, just very, very simple question. It wasn't like hypnotherapy, just said, when you think of those loud noises, what do you see? And the little boy said, I remember this is a 5-year-old, he said, "I'm hiding behind a rock, and I've got this long gun, and it's got a knife on the end, and they're shooting at me." Yeah. And the hypnotherapist just said to him, "Okay, so what do you see next?" And he said, "They've shot me in the wrist." They've shot me in the wrist, and it's very, very painful. And this is a 5-year-old. You try having a sort of sequential conversation like this with a 5-year-old. And then he said, "Okay, so what else do you see? What's the next thing you see?" And he said, I'm lying on a bed, except for it's not a bed, it's more like a bench. And they're bandaging up my wrist. And they're saying that I've got to go back in. Yeah, I've got to go back in. And I really don't want to go back in. I really don't want to go back into this. I don't want to be killed, and I don't want to kill anybody. I really don't want to go back in. And he was getting very upset by them. And this guy said, "Okay, well, what do you see next?" And he said, "I'm now walking back into the battle behind a cannon. And I'm really frightened. I really don't want to go back in. I really don't want to kill people. I don't want to be killed." And this guy, it was a very striking thing he said. He just said, "Okay, so we all live millions of times, and sometimes we have to kill people, and sometimes we're killed." And Carol made a very interesting point. She said, here I am with a 5-year-old. I didn't think he'd make anything of that. And as soon as she said, he was on her lap, getting sort of more and more upset. And then as soon as he said that, she said he just completely relaxed, and then jumped off her lap and just went off and played. You know how children are like, "Okay, I've done that." But, there's a whole world out there for him to say. I'm going to go on about it, So it just went off and played. And one of the, there's many striking things from that. And then one of the interesting things, he's got an older sister, and his older sister said, "Isn't that interesting that he was shot in his wrist?" Because he'd had this patch of eczema in his wrist since he was born that they couldn't get rid of, and they tried all sorts of things to get rid of it. And it healed, like in the next few days, it healed and never came back. And they're saying, isn't that strange? That's where he said in this thing he was shot. And Padre Toro, a friend of mine, said, what happened next? And he said the first thing he went and did, he went and bought a drum, sort of boy, and really liked making loud noises, and he's now a drummer. Yeah, he's now a drummer. Wow. And I listened to that and I thought, I have no idea what to make. You listen to the story and you listen to Carol's, and she's a very sort of straightforward story, and I don't know what to make of that. I mean, I can't explain it, and I don't want to explain it, and I can't explain it away. It's interesting because later on in their conversation, Padre Toro said, how do you know it's not a fantasy? And she said, it's very, very different with children. When they're telling a fantasy, it's much more. It's much less clear. It's much less linear. They put on a different voice. And I remember this with the girls, my partner's children. I remember, when they're making up things, you can sort of tell they've got a slightly make-up voice. She said when they talk like this, it's much flatter and straighter. Yeah. And I also next week I'll talk about Penny Satori, who's talk about near-death experiences. But it's interesting, since we had that conversation, I've had quite a lot of emails from people saying, "Oh yes, I remember having those experiences." Somebody wrote to me saying, "Oh yes, I remember being killed by a stone by this Roman guy, and I remember telling my mother, 'You're not my mother.'" Anyway, so. I don't know what to make of it. What's striking? What Carol Bowman makes of it? She's very convinced. She thinks basically that there is such a thing as reincarnation, that you are reincarnated millions of times. And as far as she's concerned, it's kind of proven. If you look at the studies, it's pretty much conclusive. She said also it's much commoner than people realise. As I say, I've had people write to me about past life memories. She said it's much, much commoner. Than most children forget after about the age of 5. Most children start to forget. There was a series on Netflix. I can't remember what it was called, but the final one was on. Some of them were actually I found frankly a bit flaky. But the final one was on children with near-death experiences, and if one of them, for instance, still remembers because they were in an aircraft that went down in the Second World War, and still, as a young man, has flashbacks to it. But most people forget. She's basically convinced. What she's interested in is trauma. She was very struck by this injury, and she's had her own experiences. I'm not sure what I think about that. I'm very sceptically minded. I'm not sure what I think about it. It might be true, it might not be true. I'm not sure what to make of that story. I'm not, as I say, I'm not coming here as a philosopher who's then looked at all the evidence, or a scientist who's looked at all the evidence. There may be other explanations for it. From a Buddhist point of view, it is both very, very suggestive and rather tricky. I don't know which one to start with. It's rather tricky because if it is, Buddhism doesn't believe in reincarnation strictly. With this and me, we'll try to wind into rebirth. Where should I start? But if it's reincarnation, the first obvious problem is where did we all come from? Because how come there's what about the population explosion? That is actually quite problematic. How comes there's much more of us than there were in the past? Where do they come from? So there are all sorts of real problems with that, and I'm sure there's many more than I can think of, but that's the obvious one. So what Buddhism teaches then, but it's striking because Buddhism teaches rebirth, which is different from reincarnation. So as I understand it, the idea of reincarnation is that there's a bit of you that's just you now. It's just Maitreyabandhu now, or just you now. And yes, you're a man or a woman, you're black or you're white, you're gay or straight, you're whatever, tall or short, And the next life you get to be a different gender, a different sex, perhaps a different, you sort of transmigrate through the world, but are basically sort of, as it were, the same person. Yeah, Buddhism doesn't believe in that. The Buddha said that's wrong. It's not true. He has a whole list of epithets, which that's not true. But also, the Buddha didn't believe that when you died, that was at the end. In fact, it's very striking because he said no to any kind of eternalism, which is basically the idea that you have a part of you now that's eternal, that you usually would think of as a soul, that would either go up to heaven, or in some traditions go down to hell, or some traditions go to purgatory, but would be forever. Or, you would be reborn forever. Yeah. The Buddha explicitly said that's not true, and he had a whole set of epithets why that's not true. But he also said, so someone would say, okay, so when you die, is that the end, completely the end of everything? He goes through the whole same set of epithets, not true, it's not helpful, it's not how things really are. But he adds one, which is he says that it's ugly, which is quite striking. So just from that little set, it seems to be that the Buddha said that eternalism, the idea that you carry on forever in some way, heaven or hell or in repeated incarnations, he said that's not true, not helpful, it's not finally how things really are. And he said that's true of the idea that you just go into oblivion at death, but he seemed to see that as slightly more negative, because he added this extra epithet that it was ugly as well, which would make our generation particularly notable for our ugliness of outlook, which is very striking. So there seems to be some other place, which is, the Buddha often talked about what he called the middle way, which is nearly always misunderstood, because it always sounds like you have left and right and then there's something in the middle. It's not that, yeah? So he said you have this idea that something goes on forever, and that's wrong, yeah? Or you have this idea that things are bounded and finite, and when you die, that's the end. And he said that's not only wrong, it's ugly, yeah? And it's striking that because the Buddhist life is extremely concerned with beauty, yeah? And he said once, it's like two fires. The fire of some kind of idea that you go on forever, and even our basic self-sense. If you're honest with yourself, you see yourself age. Sometimes I get a terrible fright when I look in the mirror. Who's that old guy? That's me. I was on a retreat recently, and somebody actually asked, had my hair always been white? I think, who have you ever met whose hair has always been white? Anyway, it's like I'm Father Time or something. So you've got this idea of, so even egotism itself is weirdly, when you're truthful about it, you do actually weirdly think that you go on forever. The Buddha's saying, no, that's not true. It's not true in any way now, and it's not true as you go on forever and become Mrs. Jones, then Mr. Whatever. You don't do that. That's not true either. But then he's saying the other fire is that you think when you die, that's at the end. He said that's like another fire, and that's not true either. And he said we're blinded by those two fires. It's like looking into two bright lights, and you're sort of blinded by them. You can, to the point which you cannot imagine another alternative. Yeah, do you see what I mean? That you can't think there could be anything. It's so bright, these two fires, that you can't imagine another alternative. And he said, my middle way is like a star above them. Yeah, if only you could look up. There is a middle and a higher way. There's some higher resolution. It's interesting, it's also a light, but a star. Some higher resolution at a higher level that is not this blinding light of either I'm going to die, which is probably, for most of us now, that's the light we're really looking at. They're like headlights of a car. That's the light we're looking at. And our life is stripped of its beauty and meaning and value if we look at that light. Yeah? Because before you know it, you get to what's the point? And before you know it, you get to this nightmare of my actions don't matter, which is increasingly becoming a kind of pseudo-philosophical view. which is massively dangerous. Yeah? Arising out of this terribly bright light of that when you die, that's the end, nothing. Yeah. So all you need to do is just have a great time while you're here, because it's not going to last very long. So it doesn't really matter how you treat people. If you believe that, try it out and just see what happens if you think it doesn't matter how you treat people. So the Buddha said there's another way. Yeah. There's a star above and beyond that, and it's called his middle way. And he also and then he teaches this doctrine of rebirth, which we're finally getting onto. When did we get onto the subject? And I've been delaying it so long because I actually don't know. I don't. Basically, these whole seminars, I go on about stuff and everyone goes, "Ooh, wow," and then I go, "I don't know." But then I say, "You don't know either." So we're on a completely even footing here. So the Buddha said that he said all sorts of things about what rebirth was. He says you can't really understand it. But the important thing to remember is it's not one of those two fires, that blind us. So one of the things that's said is, he says there is continuance, but no thing continues. There is continuance, but no thing continues. So sometimes it's imagined like lives are like a wave coming into the ocean, and it looks like it moves, but we know it's oscillating particles. We know there isn't a wave that starts over. It looks so much like a wave starts over and comes in and crashes on the floor. Actually, apparently, not like that. It's oscillating particles. Another a traditional metaphor for rebirth is that you've got two, very apparently simple metaphor, is you've got these two piles of logs, and one is on fire again, and just before it goes out, a spark from that fire leaps across and lights another fire. So, do you see what I mean? There is continuance, but no thing continues. So it's not the same pile of logs. So it's not me. It's not like a me log, which is saved, and it's a spark. But the metaphors say so much, and one of the things you're trying to do in Buddhist practice is understand the nature of metaphor, because that gets you closer to the nature of reality. The metaphor is that a spark jumps across. So is that personal or impersonal? So you go back to Carol Bowman's son, it's clearly personal. There's problems if you push that too far, I think. I can't be as certain as she is. I'm very open, more and more open to the idea of rebirth, but I can't be certain. That also means, frankly, folks, you can't say it's not true. In fact, there's very little you can say is not true. A spark jumps across. So is that me or not? So it seems to suggest the metaphor. There is continuance, but no thing continues. So there isn't a bit of you now that is just you, which is thing-like, which puts on another body like a suit of clothes and becomes the next person. And yet, it's not. The other thing that people think about rebirth is that it's like, sort of you just go into, you're like a lump of porridge that bobbles up and then you bobble back down into the porridge. Not very nice. It's not traditional metaphor. That, self arises and just goes back into this sort of impersonal slime, or porridge. That I think is too impersonal. It's a bit like, how some people think you continue in your children and your children's children. It's a bit like saying that there is continuance, but some people say continuance in your genes, continuance in your children, and continuance in people who've loved you. The Buddha isn't saying that either. It's not rationalistic like that. He seems to be trying to point that there's something. There is some continuance which seems to be able to, and I don't know, but seems to be able to be both unique and personal, and impersonal and, as it were, universal. I now no longer know what I'm talking about. But do you see how, in other words, I'm trying to say we can go wrong both ways. You can either say, it's me. The Buddha's clearly saying that's not true, it's not you. But if then you say, okay, fine, it's not me, And then the Buddha say, no, that's not right either. So you think, what am I doing? You can see it's like it's a brilliant metaphor, isn't it? These two fires. You can only look at one fire, and so it's that, isn't it? No. So it's like, oh, so it's that then? No. The Buddha's saying, look, there's something else. Now, the only way you can start to experience that something else is to work with your mind. Yeah, I cannot be certain, and I won't be certain, because I don't believe that certainty is a possibility in this life. I don't think that certainty is a reality. I think as soon as people talk about certainty, they've gone into fiction. Human life, for heaven's sake, of all the things it doesn't do is it doesn't offer you certainty, and Buddhism doesn't offer you certainty. What Buddhism offers you is a path, primarily a path of growth, so that you can come to understand things for yourself. But that understanding is not primarily a cognitive one, although it includes that. It's a direct vision of the truth. Yeah, what Buddhism is offering you is a path of human evolution where your mind, remember we don't know what that is, your consciousness, remember we don't know what that is becomes to such a point where it can apprehend the nature of reality itself, like at a glance. Yeah? And the Buddha, the figure on the shrine, has become reality. As soon as you see reality, you become reality. Interestingly, in the enlightened experience, what the Buddha does is talks about all his previous lives, which feels very like Carol Bowman talking about her son. Yeah, he says, and then I was born at such and such a place, and I ate these. It's all a bit formulaic because it's 2,500 years old and has gone through lots of editors, but, of some kind. But I was born in such and such a place. I ate this sort of food, and then I died in this sort of place. Yeah, very like Carol Bowman's son. Yeah, very like all these stories about children, but it's much more. It must be more mysterious than that. Or I don't know. I'm now getting to the end of it. Luckily, we've nearly got to the end. We're going to be exploring this much more on this retreat, because there's a lot more to say, because we haven't touched on this question of karma. But I don't want to finish with theory. I want to see if we'll just go a little bit over time. I want to just go back into meditation again, with this imaginative thought that perhaps my life is not bounded by death. Perhaps the drama of my life, and I'd like to touch more on this because there's so much to say, but perhaps the drama of my life extends through lives. That is a Buddhist view, a very straightforward Buddhist view. A traditional Buddhist wouldn't find any problem with that at all. That you've had lives before and you're going to have lives in the future, and what you're learning now is vital for the future. Yeah? So let's just play with that idea. I don't know whether it's true or not, but nor do you. So let's have a go at it. Yeah? We're not going to meditate for very long. So when you're ready, closing your eyes. And even this simple sense of ourselves is based in a view of what we are, who we are. And the way to start to open out from that view is to open out your mind into your body. To start to become more real is to leave this kind of planning, fantasizing, remembering mind and open out into the sensations of your body. So opening out to that and then tuning in again to the breath. Just following a few breaths in and out. So you can really feel your body on the cushions of the chair. You can feel your breath. And just bring into mind this idea, this thought, just play with this possibility that, well, first of all, that we don't know what happens when we die, and that perhaps we're actually not just bounded by one life, but perhaps in some way that we can't understand, we're here to learn things. And we're here to learn the things that life is trying to teach us. And that learning of things, and that growing into life, that manifesting more life, perhaps it continues throughout lifetimes. And if we had that sense, it would change our experience now. There would feel like there's more to learn and less to be frightened of. And then just come back again to your body. Feeling the weight of your body on the chair or the cushion. Good. Okay, so that's all we've got time for tonight. Next week I want to explore, try to explore what happens when we die, and then we'll continue the following week. So do come back, and let's just put our cushions and mats to the side, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Yes.